let's get started with what Marco Rubio said. We were talking about it for more than for almost 3 years of the conflict in Ukraine. And here is what he said, that maybe some sort of drastic change in the way that the United States sees the conflict in Ukraine. Here is what he said.
Beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict, and frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies on Capitol Hill and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy.
Yeah. For the first time, they're talking about this is a proxy war. And how do you see, Alex, the way that Donald Trump is trying to deal with Ukraine, while we know that the division between the United States and European countries is getting greater?
The way I can make sense of it, Nima, is if we go back to what we know, what George Soros and other Western officials told us, that this is a conflict between two systems of governance. And, one system of governance is the Western oligarchic system that gives rise almost predictably to colonialism, to imperialism, and to fascism. And I think that your choice is not to what extent you will, if you're serious about this, it's not a choice of saying to what extent you might opportunistically support all this because there might be some kind of a profit for you at the end of the road. I think that the real choice, the serious choice, is whether you're going to go along with it or whether you're going to oppose it. And it seems to me, from everything that we've seen so far, that Donald Trump and his government have decided to oppose this system. And so if you oppose this system, then you're opposing the current governments in London, Paris, Berlin, Stockholm, and many others. Some are covertly opposed to it, I suspect. If I were sitting in London in the ruling establishment, I wouldn't quite trust Giorgia Meloni. And then there are others who I would be, wondering about. But I think it's the question of opposing or supporting this system. This system has really given us a lot of these really bad things that we've experienced over the years. Creeping totalitarianism, repression, censorship, lies and distortion as the main currency of persuasion, large-scale demoralization of our societies, a collapse of living standards, loss of prosperity. I think even covert opium wars, we see more and more people in the West being addicted to drugs and alcohol. And then the forever wars. And okay, I have to say this, I've never seen a public official in any capacity give an interview with a cross on their forehead. But I suspect that there's symbolism in that too. It appears to me that Trump administration is dead serious about what they're doing. And if they're opposed to the oligarchic system of governance that draws its root from the old continent, from Europe, and I think still is headquartered in the city of London, in the strategic, philosophical, spiritual sense, then for Donald Trump and his government, the natural ally is Russia, a Christian nation. And then we also have to ask ourselves about the role of democracy, because what I see by even very learned, very well-intentioned observers and analysts is that they look at Trump and they say like, oh, Trump is kind of turning totalitarian. Is this a dictatorship being implemented, brought to the United States, ambushing the whole democratic process. And I think that there is something to this. I haven't seen these statements directly, but somebody told me that Peter Thiel was talking about this, that what actually the United States needs is a king, literally. And then people are reticent. They think like, oh, this is very bad. And I don't know why this is very bad. We have this. It seems to me that we have this kind of a sentimental attachment to the concept of democracy, because that's how we've been reared and educated all our lives to cherish the rule of the people, for the people, and by the people. Except that I think that all these well-intentioned observers should look not at what they think things should be, or what they tell us that they should be, but rather than what the system actually delivers. And we have seen the track record of these quote-unquote democracies, and they have given us all of these things that we have today: permanent wars, totalitarianism, repression, censorship, demoralization of people, collapse of the standard of living, militarization, this almost knee-jerk inclination to go to war whenever foreign policy is not going to plan. And we see this happening always stemming from these liberal democracies like the UK, France, Spain, Germany, Scandinavian countries, Baltic countries, all of these new copy-paste democracies of the East. They gave us NATO, they gave us warfare. Now we have strong push for rearmament, militarization, reduction of social welfare states in favor of building weapons of war. And so I think that the sentimental attachment to the concept of democracy is misplaced. And I also believe that if we study history carefully, we see that this same conflict between democracies and autocracies draws back all the way to the Greek antiquity. And we always see that it's the oligarchs, the ultimate stakeholders and beneficiaries of this oligarchic system of governance, who are the most vocal defenders of democracy. Isn't that strange? I mean, isn't it strange that billionaires and oligarchs like George Soros and his son Alex Soros are bleeding heart defenders of democracies, as though they really believe that the power should rightfully reside with the ordinary people, that George Soros and company want us to have power, not them. That's obviously another deception. So I think we've come to the juncture where we have to rethink our concepts. We have to study what systems actually deliver, not how they advertise themselves. And I think that we have to also shed this illusion. This is also a factoid which has been with which we have been brainwashed, that dictators and autocrats don't respond to the people. They do actually, and they are always very, very sensitive to the will of the people. And we see that, for example, Vladimir Putin, every time he implements some kind of a very unpopular policy, as he did by not intervening in Ukraine in 2014, extending the age at which people can go into retirement, his approval rating goes way down, and he is not safe in his position by any means. So even dictators, kings, autocrats of other kinds, they're always very, very sensitive to the will of the people. The will of the people ultimately decides how things go. So we shouldn't be afraid of maybe an enlightened dictatorship. And I'm not I'm not speaking in favor of Donald Trump being a dictator. I'm speaking in favor of us reassessing what we think we know about systems of governance, and then questioning how well the liberal democracies we have today have served us so far. And I think it's quite obvious that they haven't.
Yeah. Alex, when it comes to the way that Donald Trump is dealing with Zelensky, when you just revise what has happened during the meeting between Donald Trump and Zelensky, Donald Trump knows that Zelensky doesn't want peace and peace talks in case of Ukraine the way that Donald Trump wants it. And on the other hand, they bring him and in front of the press, they're discussing, they're just trashing each other, and then they're kicking him out of the White House and sending him back to Ukraine. Putting that in what has happened recently, and the 2 days ago, the yesterday and the day before, we've learned that the United States has cut off the intelligence and military aid to Ukraine. And today we've learned they're talking with the Zelensky's opposition. Poroshenko, Timoshenko, I don't know who's going to be the opposition, who's going to have some sort of popularity in Ukraine that can bring some sort of change to Ukraine. But it seems that they have been prepared for this. They knew what they're doing. It wasn't just out of the blue. They just started talking that way to Zelensky in front of the press. It was a sudden moment, an unprepared moment that they have been doing this. How do you see the way that the things are changing in the last few days, and Donald Trump, right now Zelensky, and the division between Trump and the European countries?
Excellent question, Nima. I think this strikes exactly to the core of what's going on, and I'll say what I think, what I gather from the situation, and then I'll try to explain it. I think that the proxy war against Russia via Ukraine has been inverted into a proxy war against the West, particularly the city of London, via Ukraine. And now the belligerents, quote unquote, it's not just Russia, but Russia and the United States. And here's why I think that. This saga now has been brewing for several weeks, actually, since even before September. And what we see in the press from day to day is this talk about a deal, about the rare earth minerals in Ukraine that the United States wants to appropriate, and about security guarantees. So the way British officials and British press are trying to represent it is that, Donald Trump, because he can, decided to be very greedy and to take advantage of poor Ukraine in its hour of need, and to basically blackmail them by saying, okay, you turn over your resource wealth to us, otherwise, no, we're not going to help you at all. And this is again a distortion. So the offer of the rare earth minerals concessions originates at least since September last year, when Volodymyr Zelensky went to New York. He met with Donald Trump at the Trump Towers and offered him the rare earth minerals deal. And the figure of $500 billion comes from Zelensky, not from Trump. Trump didn't invent that figure. Now, then Trump comes into power, and in the next few days, Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, goes to Kiev with a draft agreement, and Zelensky rejects it. And I thought that was very, very strange. And then he speaks with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and he says, yeah, we'll sign that agreement, but I have to run it through my legislative process. And then Marco Rubio gave an interview about this, and he spoke about it, and he said, Zelensky said he would accept the agreement, that he needs to run it through his legislative process. And then 2 days later, he goes to the media and says, I rejected the American deal. And so he now embarrassed the American Secretary of State. He insulted Donald Trump in the process. And I thought that's extraordinarily strange, because how could Volodymyr Zelensky, who is desperate to keep the American support, reject the agreement that he himself offered initially, and to do it in such a brazen, abrasive manner? What could possibly explain this? That didn't seem to make any sense at all. And then, I learned that, there was on the 4 days before Donald Trump was inaugurated, on the 16th January, Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of Great Britain, traveled to Kiev, where he and Volodymyr Zelensky signed a 100-year partnership between the Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and Ukraine, which apparently contains a secret appendix. And in that secret appendix, it says that upon cessation of hostility, Great Britain will, Ukraine turns over their natural resource wealth, as well as infrastructure, things like ports, natural gas deposits, storage facilities, pipelines, power plants, titanium deposits, and on and on and on, to British interests. So this now explains why Volodymyr Zelensky can't sign the deal with the Americans, because he already signed over the lion's share of Ukraine's wealth to the Brits. And so now the reason why I suspect that the Trump administration is perfectly aware of all this is because in that interview that Secretary of State Rubio gave after speaking with Zelensky, and after Zelensky rejected the deal, he used the word hustle. He actually said something, I hope that they're not hustling us, but then they know that they are. And they also understand that it's not Zelensky. Zelensky wouldn't dare in a million years do this unless somebody put him up to it. And that somebody is the British ruling establishment. Keir Starmer is just a figurehead. Boris Johnson, again, is very deeply involved. And, two big problems emerged. One is the problem of Zelensky rejecting the American deal. And two is the problem of Zelensky's legitimacy, because his presidential mandate expired in May of last year.
May.
Right? So again, London dispatches Boris Johnson to Kiev, and Johnson arrives there for the occasion of the 3rd anniversary of the special military operation, and that was on 24th February. Two things happened almost immediately. One, Zelensky reversed himself. He said, no, okay, I'll accept the American deal now. And the second thing that happened is that the Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, voted to extend Zelensky's presidential mandate. That was the second time they voted, because the first time they voted wrong. But now, Boris Johnson comes there and they vote again. And then they say okay, Zelensky is still president. It doesn't change anything, because his term expired. The parliament's vote is a fig leaf, because Ukraine has a constitution, and it's very clear that presidential elections can be delayed, and the term is 5 years and not a day longer. So ultimately, what happens is that if the government in Ukraine changes and the next government is aligned with Moscow and or with the new administration in the United States, they will tear up the 100-year partnership agreement between Ukraine and Britain. And so now there's this frantic footwork to keep the United States hooked to the deal, to keep, baiting them to stay on board because, hey, there's this rare earth deal that, you're going to sign eventually. And also to make sure that the United States continues to provide security guarantees for Ukraine. And then, when Boris Johnson was in Kiev and did all that busy work, he also gave a bunch of interviews to the British media. And he kind of gave away the game because he said the agreement is essential to keep the United States committed to support Ukraine militarily and financially. And so now here you have, the strategy is quite transparent. The British and maybe the French as well are inclined to send their troops to Ukraine. If the United States gives them a security guarantee, that means that they will intervene if something happens to them. So let's say if the Russians attack French or British troops, quote unquote peacekeepers, then the United States gets involved to protect them and to maybe retaliate against Russia, against the Donbas. And then also you make sure that the government in Kiev doesn't align with Russia and that it doesn't tear up these agreements that the British have. And okay, so if you had Kamala Harris in the White House and the whole Barack Obama team of public officials, then this would all stick. This would all go. But I think that Donald Trump, of all people, can see a hustle from a light year away, and they recognize what the British are doing. And so I think that Trump is kind of playing along to see where it goes, but he's also trolling them. Like, for example, on the 17th of February, he says that Volodymyr Zelensky is a dictator. Well, if he's a dictator, then his signature on that agreement is null and void. He doesn't represent Ukraine. And so the British officialdom and media just went hysterical and went to Zelensky's defense. And then I think that when Zelensky went to Washington, they understood that there wouldn't be the signing of the agreement that the United States wants. Zelensky wanted security guarantees, and he wasn't going to sign anything anyway. And then what does he do? He flies straight back to London, where he gets hugged and is lionized as a hero. Keir Starmer equates him with Winston Churchill. The media is lionizing him as a righteous freedom fighter, and on and on and on. But I think that if I'm right about all this, and if I'm right that the Trump administration is perfectly aware of what the game is, then for sure in the background, they are preparing for Zelensky's ouster and for a new acting government, and then ultimately new elections. And I believe that they are talking to the Russians about it, and that they know more or less who the candidates will be. And I think that they already most likely know who the next president will be. And I suspect it's going to be Valery Zaluzhny, who is now currently the Ukraine's ambassador in London. So I think that for London and for Western Europe, the game is lost. And they're making a whole lot of noise and doing a lot of trash talk to try to impress everybody that they're serious, that they matter, that they have power, that they can change things. But I think ultimately that they can't.
To understand that, Alex, when we look at the behavior of European countries, you see that they're committing suicide with their attitude in Ukraine. On the other hand, it seems to me that the conflict in Ukraine is turning to be that the new Russia Gate for Donald Trump, Russia Gate 2.0. In the first one, we had the Democrats in the front line and Europeans backing them. Right now, Europeans are in the front line and Democrats are backing them. The establishment in the United States is behind the scene backing them. I think that Donald Trump would face huge challenges in Ukraine. It doesn't seem the way that, I don't know if you watched Macron talking about his video message about Ukraine and the conflict in Ukraine, and the way that he was picturing Russia, the ultimate enemy of us. They're gonna attack us. They're preparing by 2030. They're gonna have a lot of weapons, a lot of forces, new forces. They're gonna attack us. They're preparing for that. This is not real. This is all fake. They're preparing to attack. They're preparing a new Russia gate, in my opinion. The main goal is Donald Trump. The main objective is Donald Trump. They know what's going on with Ukraine, but they want something else. How do you find it?
You're absolutely correct. And I think that Trump is at risk of sabotage, of new public attacks, and possibly some way of removing him or even assassinating him. The British government, the British Empire, has a long history of assassinating leaders who oppose it. Going back to at least Abraham Lincoln. Russiagate, I'm not sure if that's going to fly. We've seen over the last few days 17 Democratic congressmen and women deliver a very strong message against Trump, but they got caught speaking the same message word for word, and then all this erupted on X, where they showed them delivering the same message word for word. People are not stupid. They can see if all these supposed leaders elected by the people are speaking the same message word for word, well, then somebody gave them the message, and that somebody has enough power to tell them, look into the camera and say these words exactly. And then they say, yes, sir. They obey. So there's some kind of a higher power above all these congressmen. We don't know exactly who it is, but we can make an educated guess. And so the 4 years of Russiagate, the 8 years of almost nonstop persecution of Donald Trump with lawfare, they haven't stopped him. They haven't defeated him. And I think that in the process, the American people have learned some important lessons. And we've seen that even some leading Democratic politicians switched sides over to Donald Trump because, the false dichotomy between left and right, people are understanding that that's fake. The real dichotomy is the two systems of governance. And then either you support the globalist oligarchy, the moneylender cabal, or you support people who are fighting for your country's sovereignty and independence. And I think that those fault lines are now clear enough to a critical mass of people that I think that Donald Trump will enjoy sufficient support that he will be, let's say, a lot more insulated from this attack than he was during his first 4 years in office. Now, I see that a lot of analysts, a lot of observers are now coming up and saying, oh, Donald Trump is mounting a dictatorship. Oh, his public support is really not what it's made out to be. Actually, people are against him. It doesn't ring true to me. People cite polls. Polls are rigged by habit. They're routinely rigged. They don't mean anything. I think that the way people are reacting what you see in social media suggests that actually Donald Trump has very strong support. And then we have the question of Europe, which seems to have united behind warmongers and seems determined to go to war against Russia. But I think that that's very, very hollow, in fact, because it's limited to the ruling establishments who don't actually enjoy support from the people. And then as a result, they have to increasingly engage in censorship. They have to cancel elections. They have to sabotage elections in different ways, as Macron has done in France. They have to rig them, as I think they might have done in Germany. But if you don't have the support of the people, if the people believe that you're deceiving them and lying, then your whole agenda isn't going to get very far. And then there's a question of money. Ursula von der Leyen wants to spend 800 billion euros on a rearm Europe program. Well, where's she going to get that? Where's she going to get 800 billion euros? I think that the only place they can get it from is the printing press, which means that they're going to destroy the euro. And then if your euro is worthless, then your whole house of cards comes down.